Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit. I will be sharing some contemplations for the coming week. This is for the week of May 20th, 2024. And we are shifting things around here for the next few weeks. As we're entering Gemini season, we are immediately encountering a Gemini stellium. So one of the unique features of 2024 as a year in general that Erin Shipley and I spoke about at the top of the year. And you can always go back to that episode where Erin and I talk about the entirety of 2024, was how the ingress of the sun into a particular sign is immediately followed by a bunch of planets entering that sign as well. So one of the ways that we can think about this, right, as we're entering Gemini season, which is going to happen this coming week, we are invited to learn the Gemini ways of being in depth, right? We are skipping the 101 and we're going straight into PhD level Gemini stuff, right? So within a week, we are going to be surrounded by Gemini energy. By the end of this week, the sun, Venus, Jupiter are all going to be in Gemini. And you may know, if you are familiar with astrology, that Venus and Jupiter are the benefics, right? And so we are really learning the maybe most expansive, delicious potential of Gemini energies. We are entering Gemini universe proper this coming week. When I asked my guides about what I need to know for this specific contemplation, they asked me to keep it short, light, and to the point. And there are two reasons for this. One is so many of us are actually being asked to make huge transformations in our lives. So space is actually necessary. There's a way in which transformations, something that I think we don't necessarily talk a lot about, is how much space transformation requires of us, how much rest is usually necessary, how much we need to limit the amount of information that we are receiving on a conscious level, because our unconscious or our subconscious is being fed with a torrent, a stream of information. And if we don't make space on a conscious level, then our unconscious, our subconscious are not going to be able to digest that, right? We're just not going to have that space. And the second reason is because these transformations, at least from my perspective, look like millions of sharp micro turns, and they tend to be very light. They don't tend to be these giant proclamations, right? Of, going to social media and being like, I'm changing everything about my work, or going to your partner and being like, I don't want to see you ever again, right? It's not really that kind of transformation, although it might amount to that kind of transformation, right? But the way we're being asked to make these transformations are going to look like small little changes that happens multiple times a day, right? And so really quickly, I've talked a little bit about the astrology, but I'm just going to give a quick rundown. On Monday, the sun enters Gemini. On Wednesday, the sun in Gemini will trine Pluto in Aquarius. On Thursday, the 23rd, we have a full moon in Sagittarius. We have Venus conjoining Jupiter in Taurus. For one last time, there's like this little, it's cute actually, right? It's kind of this little kiss that Venus and Jupiter has in Taurus. Also making a sextile to Neptune in Pisces. before Venus leaves for Gemini. And then on Saturday, Venus in Gemini will trine Pluto in Aquarius, and Jupiter will enter Gemini, right? So you can see some of the influences that are happening here. There's a lot of Gemini energy, right? And all of that Gemini energy, as it's entering Gemini, is trining Pluto in Aquarius, right? Speaking to collaborating with this force of power, right? That maybe the smaller Gemini movements are impacting the larger, more fixed grid of Aquarius. And then we also have the Sagittarius energy kind of coming in. And we are also experiencing probably a pretty intense imprint of the last few degrees of Taurus activations, right? Jupiter exiting Taurus is pretty big to me because it's going to be in Gemini for next year, right? So these are all pretty significant shifts that we are having. So the main thing that I'm being asked to talk about here is about following your intuition. I mean, how many spiritual podcasts do you need to listen to that talks about following your intuition, right? It's so cliche. And a part of me cringes for sure, but there's something so potent about this. And in this contemplation, it was very clear when I tuned into this that, and those of you listening regularly knows this, I'm not here to tell you what to do. What I'm asked to do with these contemplations is to provide scaffolding to help you listen to yourself, right? To give you the nutrients on a soil level so that you can grow your own plants. So in a way, this is my case for helping you to better trust and listen to your intuition. I want to share a little bit about what I've been contemplating on around the nature of intuition. To me, so much of this is Gemini medicine. At the beginning of my journey, listening to intuition was about hearing the deeper, calmer voice, right? This makes sense because in the context of my own journey, and I think my journey probably reflects a lot of our journey, I had a lot of crap in my system, right? I had a lot of other people's voices. I had my own fears and my own anxieties and the noises of my own mental chatter. And I had unexamined expectations that I have set up with others on an energetic level in our relationships, right? That my life is essentially a web of expectations that I have in relation to people around me, right? And none of this is necessarily a bad thing. You know, in order to survive in society, we do need to listen to other people, right? Because if I start walking out of my house with no clothes on, somebody will probably call the police, and that's not going to be a very pleasant experience for me, right? Like if I want to be able to go out there and like buy some books in the bookstore, or I want to be able to enjoy the day in the park, there's a certain level of societal agreement that I need to adhere to, right? But what I'm talking about is the ways in which we are all uniquely called to specific callings, right? Uniquely called to do a specific or execute a specific mission that sometimes gets a little murky because we are hearing our own version of other people's voices in our heads that are stopping us from what our hearts truly want to lead us towards, all right? So as I go deeper in cultivating my relationship with my intuition and also becoming aware of the different ways that my intuition was speaking to me, listening to my intuition started to become more interesting and frankly a lot weirder. The instructions that I'm getting from my intuition don't always make sense to me. In fact, most of the time, they don't make sense until I ponder them more deeply and or I start taking steps towards them, right? One of my friends, Natasha Levinger, had such a great way of framing this, actually. She was once talking to me about reading energy, specifically reading past life narratives. And she talked about it in terms of like following the breadcrumbs, right? So as she's reading the energy, she may be getting a small piece of the puzzle or a tiny little scene that looks like it's coming from a movie. And then she would have to kind of describe it and go into it first in order to know what the next step is, right? It's very much like watching a movie. Like you can't get to minute 30 without first watching minute 27, right? And so what Natasha said was something along the lines of following the voice of our imagination one step at a time, right? And I love this expression. I love this framing of our intuition because often what I found once I learned to listen to the deeper, calmer voice that's beyond the level of anxiety or fears or mental chatter for me is that my intuition often tells me very random things. Like once I was told, buy some baby's breath, right? Which is a type of flower that some of you may know or have a relationship with. That I was like, what? I'm supposed to buy what? Like, this is kind of random. Or maybe I wake up in the morning and I heard this instruction to respond to someone's email that I haven't for like the past couple months, right? Kind of random. And to me, this is a really interesting feature of our intuition that often we don't talk about in the spiritual world, because when we talk about listening to our intuition, it's often packaged as fix your life by listening to your intuition, right? Which I don't think is entirely wrong, actually. Like there's something kind of true about that, right? But sometimes our intuition doesn't talk to us in terms of like huge life altering things, right? But rather these small micro movements that when I look back ended up amounting to something quite significant, right? They also can be quite subtle and very quiet. So in human design, the center in the body that's connected to intuition is the spleen center. And the spleen is also in human design associated with survival. It's said to be our most ancient, our most primal survival mode. So in a way, in human design speak, there's not a clear delineation between intuition and instinct, right? When we think about our most primal survival strategy, we think more of it in terms of instincts, in at least popular culture, right? So I think this is so interesting because when we talk about intuition, sometimes we talk about it in terms of these like big things, right? Like I need to move across the country, or I need to quit my job and become a podcaster, even though I've never recorded a podcast in my life, right? Like sometimes we have these grand visions and stories about intuition because I think we live within a culture that only really talks about intuition in terms of these huge kind of life-altering things, right? And of course, when you talk about it in hindsight, when you look back and you talk about, oh, that moment I got that instruction from my intuition to do XYZ, when we trace the arc of it, right, it did end up becoming a big thing, right? So it's not entirely wrong, but also in the moment of receiving that intuition, often it's really quiet and it's kind of like NBD, right? Like not a big deal at all. So to me, something that I really want to share here is perhaps honoring the fact that listening to your intuition can feel anticlimactic. you know? And another feature of intuition that feels important to share here is that intuition tends to cut a lot of corners. This is very Gemini, right? Gemini as a sign is ruled by Mercury, and in the Golden Dawn Association, Mercury is associated with the magician, right? There's a way, if you think about the magician card in the tarot, there's a way in which the magician moves very fast. The magician doesn't, ponder 50 million different options, right? And weigh their pros and cons before doing the thing. The magician just kind of gets to the heart and maybe skips a bunch of steps, right? So if you are an overthinker, if you know this is part of your conditioning, I'm raising my hands here, you might have this tendency of wanting to evaluate and observe all the different options, right? Go into all these different micro possibilities and try to control your reality by thinking about them. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but also part of listening to our intuition is often about letting ourselves take the jump, right? That maybe you don't need 50 million steps to get to where you want to. Maybe you get to bridge that really quickly, right? And really easily. This piece around quickness and ease, right? Like, quickness sometimes can feel really scary to the nervous system, but I think what our Gemini stellium in the sky this coming week is wanting to bring our attention towards is the fact that some of these shifts, right, can feel really easeful, really micro. It can feel like just having a conversation with a friend and then getting out of that conversation, right, noticing that everything has changed, So in conclusion, listen to the quiet, random voice of your intuition. Let yourself be gently guided in the unknowing. If the jump is asking you to do something that feels really big, that maybe feels too big for you, that feels maybe even a little scary, you can ask how you can microdose this. Is it possible that you ask for a smaller jump before making that big jump, right? And as you do this, you may also want to ask some of these guiding questions. What would my most intuitive self do in this situation? What is the quickest and most effortless way to get there? And if the information you're receiving doesn't feel good, if it feels scary, if it feels maybe potentially a little harmful, you are always allowed to slow it down, right? You get to work with what feels right, what feels digestible to you. So as I mentioned, I'm going to keep this short and sweet and let you work with everything I'm sharing. I think that is plenty. I hope this contemplation was helpful for you. I hope that sparks are flying and perhaps you are feeling a level of clarity or maybe a certain level of activation. I hope that some parts of this will inspire you to know what the right next step is for you. I look forward to seeing you again next week. If this contemplation has been helpful, if it served you, I would love to receive some review or ratings on your podcast app. That is the primary way that this work gets out there. If you want to share it with members of your community, that would also be deeply, deeply appreciated. All right, I will talk to you again soon. I'm sending you so much love, and I hope you have a beautiful week. Enjoy Gemini season.